Tehran, January 2017. A woman walks through the Shorbad district of southern Tehran, counting her steps. 32 paces from the corner shop to the first lamppost. 19 more to the warehouse gate. She wears a dark chador that covers everything except her face. Her male companion walks half a step ahead the arrangement Iranian law requires. To the security guard watching from across the street, they are unremarkable. Just another married couple navigating the industrial maze of warehouses and faded storefronts. But the woman is memorizing details no wife should notice. The height of the perimeter fence, the camera angle above the loading dock, the exact moment when the guard turns his back to check his phone. She is a Mossad agent operating under deep cover inside Iran. Her real name, is buried in a classified file in Tel Aviv that only 4 people have clearance to access. Here, she is Roya, a woman with a fabricated past, forged documents, and a backstory designed to survive interrogation. But survival depends on one thing, never contradicting the lie she is living. And in 23 seconds, someone is going to ask her a question she hasn't prepared for. The operation began 18 months earlier, when Mossad planners identified a problem that couldn't be solved remotely. Iranian intelligence had hidden half a ton of nuclear weapons documentation inside a civilian warehouse in South Tehran, a location too sensitive for satellite reconnaissance alone, and too protected for a blind assault. They needed human intelligence from inside Iran, not from a local asset who could be compromised or turned, from someone who could physically walk the perimeter and document what no camera could see. The solution was a legend intelligence terminology for a completely fabricated identity designed to withstand scrutiny. The agent Mossad selected was fluent in Farsi, but that wasn't sufficient. She would need documentation, proving she belonged to an Iranian family. A backstory that explained her accent, her mannerisms, her reasons for being in Tehran. And most critically, she would need a male guardian, because Iranian law prohibits women from moving freely in public without male accompaniment. This created the operation's first structural problem. Mossad couldn't send 2 agents posing as a married couple. The risk of cascading failure was too high. If one was compromised, both would be exposed. So they recruited a local collaborator, an Iranian national, connected to pro-democracy circles who agreed to assist what he believed was an activist documenting government corruption. He was never told her real identity. He was never told the real target. His ignorance became her first layer of protection, but it also meant she couldn't fully trust the one person keeping her cover intact. The agent entered Iran through Istanbul in late 2016, traveling on forged Iranian documentation that listed her as a returning expatriate. Border security at Tehran's Imam Khomeini International Airport flagged her passport for secondary screening, a routine check that became 27 minutes of questions. Where had she been living abroad? Why was she returning now? What family connections did she maintain in Iran? She answered every question. Her documentation was flawless, but the interrogation revealed something Mossad planners hadn't anticipated. Iranian intelligence was running facial recognition software on all arriving passengers, cross-referencing them against internal watch lists. The agent's photograph was now in a government database. Any subsequent arrest, even for a minor traffic violation, would trigger a biometric match. From that moment, perfection wasn't optional. It was the only thing preventing interrogation. The agent's cover identity required integration into an existing Iranian family structure. Mossad had arranged for her to stay with distant relatives of her male guardian, people who asked few questions because they assumed she was connected to the political underground, not a foreign intelligence service. But within the first week, the guardian's wife began watching her. Not with open suspicion, just the quiet observation of a woman who notices when her husband spends too much time speaking privately with someone else. The agent had trained for interrogation. She had trained for arrest scenarios and emergency extraction protocols. She had not trained for this, a domestic tension she couldn't diffuse without revealing the truth, and couldn't ignore without creating the kind of household conflict that draws outside attention. So she made a calculated decision. She told the wife a version of the truth. She admitted she was gathering information. She admitted she was working with the husband on something covert. but she framed it as political activism documenting corruption at government-controlled warehouses. The lie worked because it was close enough to reality to feel authentic, but it also meant a third person now knew she was hiding something. And every additional person who believes part of the lie increases the probability that someone will eventually ask the one question that exposes all of it. The agent had been in Iran for 19 days. She still hadn't seen the target warehouse, and the Guardian's wife was starting to ask why a woman documenting corruption needed to spend so much time fixing her appearance before going out in public. On her 23rd day in Tehran, the agent finally approached the target warehouse in Shohrabad. She and her guardian walked past it during afternoon prayers, when foot traffic was lightest and security personnel rotated shifts. They moved slowly, discussing an invented errand about purchasing industrial supplies from a nearby vendor. The agent counted 47 paces along the perimeter fence. She noted 3 cameras, 2 covering the main gate, 1 positioned above a side entrance that appeared less frequently used. The entire observation lasted 90 seconds. But as they turned the corner, the Guardian made a mistake. He glanced back at the warehouse, then immediately forward again, a reflexive movement that lasted less than 2 seconds. The agent saw it. So did a security guard standing across the street. The guard's expression didn't change. He didn't approach. He simply made a note on a clipboard and continued his patrol. Iranian counterintelligence protocols flag any individual who visits a sensitive site more than 3 times without documented reason. The agent had no way of knowing if that single backward glance had just started a file with their descriptions. She couldn't ask the Guardian what he'd been thinking because acknowledging the mistake would confirm they were both aware the warehouse mattered. So, she did nothing. And that uncertainty became a weight she carried through every subsequent trip. Over the next 4 months, the agent and her guardian made 17 trips past the warehouse. Each visit required a plausible reason: running errands, visiting a nearby shop, taking a shortcut to another district. The agent deliberately varied her appearance on each trip, different head coverings, different walking speeds, different times of day. But variation creates its own pattern, and patterns are exactly what surveillance systems are designed to detect. On the 9th visit, the same security guard from their first reconnaissance made eye contact with the agent for 3 seconds longer than normal. He didn't speak. He didn't follow. He just watched her pass with an expression that could have been recognition or coincidence. The agent had 2 choices: abort the reconnaissance and report the potential compromise, or gamble that the guard's attention was routine. Aborting meant explaining to Tel Aviv why months of preparation had failed. It meant losing the only intelligence window into a target Mossad had spent years trying to penetrate. So she made a decision that wasn't authorized by her controllers. 2 days later, she returned with her guardian and staged a loud argument in front of the same guard, a domestic dispute about money that forced the guard to look away in discomfort. Married couples arguing in public are invisible, unremarkable. The gamble worked. The guard ignored them on the next 3 visits. But the agent had violated protocol. She had improvised a deception to cover a potential exposure without approval from Tel Aviv. And she would never know if the guard had actually been suspicious, or if she had created a crisis out of paranoia and then risked the entire operation to resolve a threat that didn't exist. In November 2017, 6 weeks before the planned heist, the Guardian's wife confronted her husband. She didn't accuse him of an affair. She accused him of endangering the family. The whispered argument happened in their kitchen while the agent was in another room. But the walls were thin, and she heard fragments, asking too many questions. Government facilities if they find out. The wife wasn't angry about infidelity. She was terrified her husband's political activism would bring Iranian security services to their door, and she was right to be terrified just for the wrong reasons. The agent reported the conversation to her Mossad handler through an encrypted signal embedded in a routine email about family updates. The response came back within 18 hours. Continue, monitor, do not engage unless compromise is imminent. But imminent is a word that means different things to operatives in Tel Aviv and agents living inside a surveillance state. The agent began calculating extraction scenarios, how quickly she could reach the Turkish border, which routes avoided military checkpoints, whether she could disappear before Iranian intelligence connected her face to the warehouse reconnaissance. She was no longer certain the operation could succeed. She was only certain that staying increased the probability of arrest with every additional day. What the agent didn't know, what Mossad didn't know, was that the Guardian's wife had already made a decision. In late November 2017, she filed a confidential report with Iranian security services. She didn't report the agent as a spy. She reported her husband, claiming he was involved in political activities that could endanger the family. Iranian intelligence opened a low-priority file. They didn't immediately surveil the husband, but they flagged his national ID number for routine monitoring. Any interaction he had with government systems, border crossings, bank transactions, traffic stops, would now generate an automated intelligence report. The file was classified as domestic unrest, not foreign espionage. The wife's report described her husband as naive, possibly manipulated by anti-government activists, but not as a deliberate threat. From Iranian intelligence's perspective, this was a loyal citizen protecting her family by reporting suspicious behavior early. From Mossad's perspective, if they had known, it was catastrophic. The Guardian was now under passive surveillance, which meant anyone he spent time with would eventually be scrutinized. The agent was walking through Tehran with a man whose movements were being logged by the same intelligence apparatus she was trying to avoid. But neither the agent nor the Guardian knew they were being watched. And Mossad had no indication that the family's internal tension had just created an external threat. In December 2017, 3 weeks before the scheduled heist, the agent's handler sent a single-line encrypted message, final confirmation required, status green or abort. The agent had 48 hours to respond. She had documented the warehouse's security rotations, camera blind spots, and perimeter weaknesses. The intelligence was complete. The operation could proceed. But she also knew the Guardian's wife was suspicious. She knew a security guard had noticed them. She knew that 17 trips past a sensitive facility was approaching the threshold where pattern recognition algorithms flag anomalies. What she didn't know was whether those risks were manageable or catastrophic. She sent back 2 words, status green. The operation was locked in. The heist would proceed on January 31, 2018, and the agent would spend the next 42 days wondering if she had just approved her own execution. January 18, 2018, 13 days before the heist. The Guardian was stopped at a police checkpoint on Azadi Street during a routine document inspection. The officer scanned his national ID card. The system flagged it. The officer asked him to step out of the vehicle. The agent wasn't with him. She was 4 kilometers away in a cafe, waiting for him to return from what should have been a 15-minute errand to purchase supplies. When 40 minutes passed with no contact, she began running extraction calculations in her head. The questioning lasted 53 minutes. The officer wanted to know about the Guardian's political affiliations, his recent travel, who he spent time with, whether he had noticed any unusual activity in his neighborhood. The Guardian understood immediately that this wasn't random. His wife's report had triggered surveillance he hadn't been aware of. He panicked. Not because he feared arrest, he genuinely believed he was helping a pro-democracy activist document government corruption, nothing more. But he feared that his association with the agent would be discovered, and that Iranian security would classify him as a subversive. So he made a decision designed to protect himself. He told the officer he had recently ended a friendship with a woman who had been asking inappropriate questions about government facilities. The statement was intended to create distance, to signal cooperation, to demonstrate that he had recognized suspicious behavior and terminated contact. The officer made notes, asked for the woman's name. The Guardian gave a partial description vague enough to avoid complete identification, specific enough to appear helpful. The officer let him go with a warning to report any further contact. The Guardian drove back to the cafe, shaking, believing he had just narrowly avoided arrest. The agent saw his expression the moment he walked through the door. She didn't ask what happened, not in public, not where surveillance cameras could record the conversation. They left separately, met 2 hours later in a location they had prearranged for emergencies. When the Guardian explained what he'd told the police officer, the agent went silent for 11 seconds. She was calculating whether the operation had just been compromised or whether the Guardian's lie had accidentally reinforced her cover. The agent sent an encrypted signal to Tel Aviv that night. Guardian interviewed. Described contact. Assessed compromise level. The response came back 14 hours later. Hold position. Evaluate Guardian stability. Stand by for abort authorization. For 3 days, the operation was suspended. The agent watched the Guardian for signs that he was under active surveillance. She monitored his behavior for inconsistencies that would indicate Iranian intelligence had turned him into an informant. She found nothing. But absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. On January 22nd, Mossad sent final instructions. Operation proceeds as planned. Guardian is asset, not liability. Iranian response indicates low threat classification. The assessment was based on signals intelligence intercepts showing that Iranian security had logged the Guardian's statement as a cooperative disclosure from a concerned citizen, not as evidence of foreign espionage. But the agent didn't have access to those intercepts. She only had Mossad's conclusion and an instruction to trust a man who had just described her to police. She had 9 days to decide whether Tel Aviv's assessment was correct or whether she was walking into an arrest. January 30th, 2018, the agent met with her Guardian one final time to review the reconnaissance intelligence she would pass to the assault team. They sat in his car, parked in an industrial lot 3 kilometers from the target warehouse. She walked him through the security rotation schedule, the camera blind spots, the perimeter weaknesses. The Guardian asked a question he had never asked before. What happens after this? The agent didn't answer immediately. She had been instructed to tell him that the documentation they were gathering would be used to expose government corruption through international media channels. But sitting in that car, knowing the heist would happen in less than 24 hours, she made a decision that violated every protocol she had been trained to follow. She told him the truth, or part of it. "You won't see me again after tomorrow." The Guardian stared at her. "What are you really doing?" The agent didn't answer. She stepped out of the car and walked away. She would never know if that partial confession had been a mistake, or if giving him a warning he couldn't fully understand was the only moral choice available. January 31st, 2018, U2, 17 a.m. The assault team breached the Shorebad warehouse using the intelligence the agent had gathered over 4 months. The agent was not part of the operation. She was in a safe house 17 kilometers away, waiting for confirmation that the team had extracted successfully. The confirmation was supposed to come within 7 hours. It didn't. At 09:30 a.m., Iranian state media reported a security incident at a government facility in South Tehran. No details, no arrests announced. The agent had no way of knowing if the heist had succeeded, failed, or been discovered mid-operation. She sat in the safe house with forged travel documents and an extraction route planned down to the minute, waiting for a signal that didn't come. At 11:47 a.m., her phone received a single encrypted message: "Package secure. Initiate exit protocol." The operation had succeeded. 1/2 ton of nuclear documentation was out of Iran, but the agent's extraction window had just collapsed. Mossad had planned for the agent to leave Iran within 72 hours of the heist, traveling through Tehran's Imam Khomeini International Airport on commercial flight under her cover identity. But Iranian authorities closed the airport to all outbound passengers, matching her demographic profile within 6 hours of discovering the breach: single women, aged 25-40, traveling alone, with recently issued passports. The assumption had been that Iranian intelligence would need at least 48 hours to analyze the heist and identify potential suspects. They needed 6. The agent couldn't leave through the airport. She couldn't stay in Tehran. The Guardian's wife knew her face, and a public reward for information about suspicious individuals near the warehouse would almost certainly trigger a report. Mossad activated a contingency extraction, an overland route through Kurdish territory toward the Iraqi border. The route had never been tested with a female operative. Iranian military checkpoints in the northern provinces routinely detained women traveling without male guardians. The agent had 72 hours to cross 300 kilometers of hostile territory, using documentation she had never rehearsed. She left the safe house on February 1st at 3:20 a.m., carrying forged papers identifying her as a medical supply courier. She would be stopped at 4 military checkpoints. At the third, a soldier would ask her a question she hadn't prepared for, and her answer would determine whether she died in Iran or disappeared into the kind of silence intelligence agencies call success. February 3, 2018, Kurdish region, northern Iran. The agent reached the third military checkpoint at 14:22 p.m., traveling in a commercial transport vehicle with 6 other passengers. A Revolutionary Guard soldier boarded the vehicle and began checking identification documents. When he reached the agent, he examined her medical courier credentials for 7 seconds longer than he had examined anyone else's. Then he asked, "Why does your travel authorization list departure from Tabriz, but your passport shows entry through Tehran?" The question existed because of a decision Mossad had made 4 months earlier to create her legend as a returning expatriate entering through Tehran's airport, but to fabricate her extraction documents as originating from a northern city to justify the Kurdish route. The two identities didn't align, and the soldier had noticed. The agent had 3 seconds to answer before silence became suspicious. She told him the truth. Her documents had been corrected after a clerical error at the Ministry of Health. The soldier stared at her. Then he handed back her papers and moved to the next passenger. He accepted the explanation, not because it was convincing, but because bureaucratic incompetence was more plausible than espionage. The agent crossed into Kurdish-controlled territory 90 minutes later. A Mossad extraction team moved her across the Iraqi border on February 5th. She had been inside Iran for 14 months. She would never return. March 12, 2018, Tehran. Iranian intelligence arrested the Guardian on suspicion of providing logistical support to foreign operatives. The interrogation lasted 11 weeks. He maintained consistently that he had been deceived, that he believed he was assisting a pro-democracy activist, not Israeli intelligence. His statement to the police officer at the January checkpoint, the one where he claimed to have distanced himself from the agent, became the only evidence that saved him from execution. Iranian authorities concluded he had been manipulated, not complicit. The case file classified him as negligent rather than traitorous. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison for failing to report suspected espionage activity. Mossad made no attempt to extract him. His role had ended the moment the agent crossed the border. The Guardian's decision to lie at the checkpoint, a panicked attempt to protect himself, had accidentally created the documentation, proving he wasn't a willing collaborator. He saved his own life by betraying someone he never fully understood. The Guardian's wife was never charged. But her November 2017 report to Iranian security services, filed out of fear that her husband's activism would endanger the family, had created the surveillance file that flagged him at the checkpoint. That flag had triggered the interrogation, where he described the agent to police. That description had been logged into Iranian intelligence systems, creating a record that helped authorities trace the agent's movements after the heist. The wife's attempt to protect her family had accidentally generated the intelligence trail that nearly trapped the operative she never knew existed. She lives in Tehran today, unaware that her jealousy and fear became operational variables in an espionage operation conducted by a foreign government. The documents stolen from the Shohrabad warehouse became the foundation for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's April 2018 presentation to the United Nations, where he revealed details of Iran's AMAD project, a covert nuclear weapons development program. The archive contained 100,000 files, designs for uranium deuteride, schematics for warhead engineering, and evidence of high-level government approval. The International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed the documents were authentic. Western governments used the material to justify reimposing sanctions on Iran. The operation achieved its strategic objective. But 14 Iranian nationals were arrested in connection with the breach. 7 were convicted of security negligence. 3 remain in prison. None of them knew the woman who had walked past their facility 17 times. The Mossad agent's identity has never been publicly confirmed. In 2023, Israeli intelligence sources acknowledged that the Farsi-speaking operative who conducted reconnaissance for the Tehran archive operation has not returned to fieldwork. The psychological cost of maintaining a false identity for 14 months of calculating every word, every gesture, every relationship created damage that didn't appear in operational debriefs. She still speaks Farsi fluently, but she can no longer hear the language without triggering the reflexive paranoia that someone is listening for inconsistencies. Mossad classifies the Tehran archive operation as one of its most significant intelligence successes. But the woman who made it possible cannot be named, cannot be honored, and cannot speak about what she survived. Because the most effective lies are the ones that erase the person who lived them. And some deceptions succeed so completely that the deceiver disappears even from their own story. The Tehran archive operation proved that human intelligence can penetrate targets no technology can reach. But it also proved that deception has costs that outlast the operation, costs measured in prison sentences, broken families, and operatives who survive the mission but not the lie.